Hello, everybody. It's George from Ireland. Thank you for coming back to my channel, commenting on Vladimirovich Putin visiting one of the few countries with which Russia has very fraternal relations. And I'm not Russophobic in the least. Had some dear friends who are Russian. Was happy to live in Moscow, and were it not for current circumstances, I'd be very happy to revisit, go to St. Petersburg and stuff. And it's awful pity that they're being tyrannized by Putin, but it signifies just how diminished Russia's status is that he has to go cap in hand to the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, as it styles itself. I don't remember who said, some American politician, if you have to say you're a lady, you probably ain't. There's some over protestation in putting democratic in the constitutional title of the country. And don't forget, North Korea claims to be the legitimate government of the whole of the Korean Peninsula, claims to also rightfully rule South Korea, with whom it doesn't have diplomatic relations. He thinks that the Republic of Korea, i.e., South Korea, also claims to be the legitimate authority over the whole country, because it was divided at the end of the Second World War between the Soviets and the Americans. Japanese ruled Korea. The Japanese ruled it for roughly 50 years. And how are they going to split it? And two U.S. Army officers were given a task to propose that. They came back to their senior officer 5 minutes later, said along the 38th parallel, that line of latitude. Why, they were asked? Well, because it puts the capital Seoul in the American zone, Seoul meaning capital in the Korean language, but it compensates the Soviets by giving them a bit more than half the country, about 55%, and the Soviets accept the proposal. Korean War in 1950, the two sort of satellite states, the Soviet-backed North and the American-backed South, won't go to the Korean War, but a frozen conflict since 1953. So when the Berlin Wall came tumbling down, the Soviet Union dissolved, Russia retained cordial relations with North Korea. Russia was beset by its internal problems. There was a famine in North Korea in the 1990s. Millions of people starved to death. So that's how good socialism is at abolishing poverty. Well, it starves poor people to death. So in a sense, it does reduce poverty. I remember a British communist saying, blaming the United States for it. What? Why? Why would you want to trade with the United States? That's capitalism, not exploitation, wouldn't it? The USA, where even the poorest people can get food and they're giving food away, charities, they're throwing food away. Their problem is obesity, not malnutrition. But surely wouldn't it be better to open up to capitalism and prosper? You've seen former communist countries have done that, and you could end up something like Estonia. But then you see where North Korea is, which is like a century behind South Korea, where horse and cart is still used as a practical means of transport, whereas South Korea produces excellent cars. South Korea came from being on the economic level of Ghana in 1953 to being one of the richest countries in the world today. The contrast between communism and capitalism couldn't be starker. North Korea being a country which still has slavery, and I do mean that in an absolutely literal sense, slavery for political dissidents in these labor camps, and discriminating on the basis of social class. Three socioeconomic classes. The highest one, those whose ancestors fought against the Japanese. The middle one, for those whose ancestors were neutral. And the lowest one, for those who cooperated with the Japanese. I know Japanese rule in Korea was brutal, but it did have its upsides. I said that to a South Korean woman who spent some time in Japan, thinking she might perceive both sides of the debate, but she absolutely didn't. Not denying that the Japanese government committed crimes in Korea, such as against comfort women and so on, but there were a few technological advantages, and it's obviously an uncomfortable fact for South Korea that some of its leaders in the decades after Japanese rule had happily and actively cooperated with Japanese rule. But onto this: why is Putin going? He's only ever been there once in 2000. Why is he visiting a pariah state? Because he's really down in his uppers, because they need those shells, because the Soviets sold a lot of military hardware to the North Koreans. They need to buy it back now. I think the North Koreans are able to make some of their own, and the Ukrainians have found a lot of these. A lot of these are duds. The North Koreans have given to the Soviets. The fuses don't work, fired and then don't explode on impact. They found the markings on them. So that's it. And North Korea is as an outcast. What else can they do? But they're ostracized by the rest of the world, facing sanctions, severe sanctions for decades. Even Russia voted for these sanctions. But for China, North Korea is a problem for the United States, South Korea, Japan, a problem that the China can turn up or turn down, depending on how much cooperation they get from the West and other issues. Likewise, Russia sees it this way. Remember, the North Korea borders only two other countries, and that's That's obviously Russia and China. Obviously, much of the bigger border is with China, but Russia's the second biggest trade partner. I'm not saying South Korea is a country because, of course, Korea is Korea, the whole country, the whole of Peninsula is a country. So they don't trade with South Korea. And the North Koreans are interested in getting Russian military technology, more advanced stuff. They've got the really primitive stuff, but they do have it in bulk. What they lack in quality, they make up for in quantity, is the idea. A bit like Russia's doing, it's cheap stuff, or their troops aren't very well trained, but they do have a lot of them, and they just throw numbers, and eventually numbers tell. You think of these battles in Africa in the 19th century, where the European army, they've got rifles, and the African army has spears. The Europeans, they can defeat the Africans at that number 10 to 1, but maybe not 20 to 1. Eventually, sheer numbers tell. So Putin, he landed there at 3 o'clock in the morning, Korean time, and it's indicative of just what importance that North Korea attaches to this, that their supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, went to the airport to greet him. Fat boy fat, as he's unaffectionately known. He was walking with a limp. He's not even 40 years old. Who was a heart attack waiting to happen. His sister may well be a successor. So, and women almost never rise to high positions in his country. But anyway, so he received a rapturous reception. Everything completely choreographed. Every public utterance is scripted there. It really is a dark vision. It is 1984 come to life. Is staggering. And there is a bit of a middle class. The so-called the Pyongyang elite might have a living standard Western countries would see as middle class, under 1% of the population. A small percentage will be sort of working class by Western standards, and the great majority of people live in dire penury. Um, so Putin is making common cause with one of the most evil regimes in the world, ritual denunciations of the United States and other Western countries. In fairness, some of the criticisms will be valid, what they say. The foreign policies of Western countries are not always entirely moral. Um, and mutual aid. Well, North Korea would need it because probably even China wouldn't come to their aid. And if they're giving away more munitions, they're relatively poorly defended. But they say that demilitarized zone is actually highly militarized between North Korea and South Korea, the most mined place in the world. And Seoul was as well within artillery range of North Korea, that if their war goes hot, that they would demolish a lot of South Korea. South Koreans have a very soft and comfortable lifestyle, working very long hours, but they're often quite well off, and one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, so plenty of money. Um, and the idea is because they're a bit decadent, the North Koreans think, and they don't want this jeopardized. If the shopping center is blown up, if they lose electricity for a few hours, they won't be able to take it. And North Korea is so low tech, the standard of living is so low, it can't really go any lower in a war. So that's why they think they can threaten the South Koreans, because they've got military conscription. So anyway, and Putin is presumably not going home empty-handed. North Korea needs oil and needs food. So Russia's been breaking United Nations sanctions for a few years. They voted to end inspection of sanctions on North Korea. They're obviously trying to collude with North Korea to help them get away with breaking the sanctions, and the North Koreans would know how to evade them. They also have their laborers working around the world. They're in Russia, in remote and inhospitable regions of Russia, where Russia finds it very difficult to persuade people to go. I remember in Siberia, the population is falling for decades, and it's actually alarming for Russia. And Putin's making it even worse by disproportionately drafting men from these remote, poverty-stricken regions to go and get killed in Ukraine. So anyway, North Korean laborers going there paid below the Russian minimum wage, and some of their salary goes straight to the North Korean regime. They say that North Koreans would have paid bribes to get these. These would be coveted jobs. That might seem staggering because standards of living in North Korea are so low that if you get 3 meals a day, you're doing well. And that's why they envy the opportunity to work in North Korea, China, elsewhere. Some of them somehow tried to run away. It's very, very dispiriting. Reminds me to thank my lucky stars, just how fortunate I was to be born in Ireland. Anyway, so that's what his meeting is, and he will have come away with something from it. It just shows how sick he is, the utter depravity of the Putin regime. Anyway, thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon and donate on PayPal. GeorgeCallahan79 at gmail.com. Goodbye.